I had just stepped through the doors of that hotel when I heard her voice carry clean across the lobby. "Oh, look, the gardener is here," said the way people say things when they want everyone to hear, but can pretend later that maybe you didn't. I stopped walking. My best cotton dress, pressed since before sunrise, Simone's pearl earrings, 62 years old, and in 4 words, I felt like a woman who had walked into a room she was never meant to enter. What made it land so hard? The woman who said it was about to become my son's wife. The people around her laughed. My hand tightened around my purse strap. That old brown leather purse Gerald gave me the Christmas before he passed. The one I can't bring myself to replace. My breath went shallow, the way it does when your body understands something before your mind catches up. I almost turned around. Right then. Back out those glass doors, back to the bus stop on Peachtree Street, home before dark. But then Desmond was there. He moved through the crowd quietly, stepped close, took my hand and held it until I felt every bone in his grip. Leaned down near my ear. "Mom, just trust me." 10 seconds. That's how long he waited before he said it. 10 seconds of holding my hand while I stood there swallowing what just happened. And then, so quietly I almost missed it, his right hand slipped something into the breast pocket of his vest. A USB drive, no larger than my thumbnail, gone in half a second. I didn't turn around, not because I wasn't hurt, I was, but I thought about every morning I'd risen before dawn to water that land so my son could go to school with lunch money in his pocket. I thought about the years I kept that farm alive alone, talking to Gerald's photograph at night like he could still hear me. I breathed, took one step forward, then another, my heart full of doubt, my feet moving anyway. My name is Raven Thornton, 62 years old. I have believed one thing my whole life. The land you work with your own hands will never lie to you. Not inherited, not gifted. 25 acres of sweet Auburn soil just outside Atlanta, Georgia. Earned seed by seed, sunrise by sunrise, with these 2 calloused hands. That belief carried me through a husband's death, through drought years, through winters that cracked the bark on my pecan trees. It kept me standing when nothing else did. So when Desmond called last spring, "Mom, I'm getting married. I need you there." I pressed my best dress before 6 in the morning, borrowed Simone's earrings, and took the number 12 bus downtown. I told myself, "Raven, you raised a good man. Go watch him get married." I walked through those doors with my head up and my heart full, and in 4 minutes, both of those things were tested. What I didn't know, standing in that lobby with Desmond's hand squeezing mine and that USB drive already in his pocket, was that my son had spent 8 months building something I knew nothing about, something that was going to change everything for every person in that room. The chandelier light was golden and warm. The laughter was soft and polished. Some places are designed to make you feel small before you ever open your mouth. Kiara's cruelty wasn't impulsive. It was performed, timed, aimed, placed exactly where an audience could witness it. People who weaponize humiliation never strike in private. They need witnesses. Because the wound they want to leave isn't just to your pride, it's to how others see you. And the man standing beside me heard every word and didn't move a muscle. Not because he didn't feel it, because he was already working. Could you have stayed in that room? Could you have swallowed that humiliation on trust alone, with nothing but 4 words and your son's eyes to hold on to? Drop your answer in the comments, because what Raven did next is the part most people get wrong. You cannot understand what happened in that lobby without first understanding what Sweet Auburn Farm means to me. Gerald and I bought those 25 acres in 1991. The land was tired, overgrown. Everyone said we were foolish. Gerald smiled that slow smile of his, started in his eyes before it reached his mouth, and said, "Baby, good land just needs somebody willing to believe in it." We believed with everything we had. We planted 47 pecan trees that first fall. Gerald promised that by the time we were old and gray, we'd sit under their shade and watch our grandchildren run. He kept half that promise. Those trees are magnificent now. Gerald passed 8 years ago. Heart attack on a Tuesday morning in October. Still wearing his work gloves. After that, it was just me and the land. Desmond was 26 when his father died. Drove back from his engineering job in Charlotte every other weekend. Fixed the fence line, repaired the irrigation, checked on the truck. Never once complained. He was his father's son in every way that mattered. So when he called 20 months ago and said he'd met someone, Buckhead family, money, and standing, I prayed quietly, kept my face neutral, and reserved judgment. Kiara Montgomery came to Sweet Auburn on a Saturday morning in March. Heels all wrong for gravel paths. She picked her way across my yard like the earth itself was an inconvenience. But she smiled beautifully, called me Ms. Raven, said, "You are honestly the strongest woman I've ever met." I almost believed her. Her father, Lamar Price, stocky, expensive suit, eyes like 2 raisins set too deep in dough, shook my hand at Sunday dinner and spent half the meal asking about the property boundaries. 3 times, I counted. He asked about the deed, about the acreage, about whether I had a will drawn up. I told myself he was just a nervous man who talked too much. Then came the evening that turned my stomach cold. I was coming in from the back field after dusk, boots muddy, sky going purple behind the tree line. Lamar was on his phone by the side porch, hadn't heard the gate. His voice carried clean across the still air. "The old woman's almost ready to sign. Once the wedding's done, that land is ours. It'll cover everything we owe." I stood frozen in the shadow of the fig tree. The old woman, 2 words that don't just take away your name, they erase you entirely. You become a problem with a signature, an obstacle to be managed. I wanted to walk straight to that porch and look him in his small raisin eyes, but my hand found the gatepost instead and held it. I thought about Gerald, about what he would have done, about how I had learned in 8 years of doing things alone that sometimes you have to understand the full shape of something ugly before you move against it. I went inside, didn't sleep. The next morning, I nearly went to Desmond's room and knocked until he answered, but when I reached his door, I heard him on his own phone, low, careful, a voice I didn't entirely recognize. "Everything's in place. She doesn't know yet." I stood in that hallway a long time. Simone called the following day. She'd been asking around, the way women our age do, through church circles and beauty shop conversations, and a cousin in Savannah who knew the right people. "Raven," she said, barely above a whisper, "the Price family has done this before, moved into families through marriage, manipulated land transfers, a widow in Macon, a family in Savannah. They've been doing this for years." I sat down at my kitchen table and put my face in both hands. My son was about to marry into this family. I almost left that same week, bag half packed on a Thursday evening. But when Desmond stopped by that Friday, quiet, steady, watching me with those careful eyes, something made me stay my hand. Then Kiara arrived unexpected, a wrapped gift, a warm smile. She touched my arm and said I was the most remarkable mother-in-law she could have hoped for. I unpacked my bag, told myself I'd misread everything, that Simone's information was off, that I was a tired woman seeing shadows. That moment of self-doubt wasn't weakness. It was something more complicated. The way the mind protects itself when the truth costs too much to accept all at once. Kiara knew exactly how to use that, a well-timed kindness to reset the clock on suspicion. Then I found the contract. I was going through Desmond's old room one afternoon. He'd been staying over during the planning visits, leaving things behind the way grown children do. Inside a portfolio folder wedged between his nightstand and the wall was a document I had never seen. A deed transfer for Sweet Auburn Farm, dated, notarized, with my signature at the bottom. My hands shook so badly I had to lay the papers flat on the dresser to read them. Paper clipped to the back, a handwritten timeline on plain white paper. Week 1, observation. Week 2, rapport building. Wedding day, transfer executed. Week 3, auction listing. Auction. My pecan trees. Gerald's fence line. 30 years of our lives, scheduled for auction 3 weeks after the wedding. I stood in that room and looked out the window at the farm, the birds still going, the irrigation still running, everything exactly the same as it had been an hour ago. And yet I was holding a document that said none of it was mine anymore. 3 days before the rehearsal dinner, Zora came to my garden. She stepped deliberately onto my marigold border. I watched it happen. I believe she knew exactly what she was doing. Then she held out a personal check, $50,000. "Take it," she said pleasantly, "and please, don't bring that garden smell to the wedding." I looked at that check for a long moment. Then I dropped it in the trash can by the gate, without one word. Something shifted behind Zora's eyes, not embarrassment, recalculation. She had come to my garden expecting gratitude. She got silence and a trash can. And for the first time, I saw the first crack in her certainty. That evening, Desmond came for supper, quieter than usual. He ate, helped me wash the dishes, and before he left, he squeezed my shoulder at the door. "Mom, whatever happens these next few days, please don't react. Just trust me." I searched his face, jaw set, eyes steady. And after supper, I sat on the back porch in the last of the light and watched the pecan canopy go dark. And I talked to Gerald, the way I do sometimes, when things are too heavy to carry alone. "I don't know what our boy is doing," I told him, "but I need you to help me trust him." The farm settled into its nighttime sounds around me. I still didn't know which way to fall. But I was about to find out that while I sat in that dark, my son had not stopped working for a single day. The rehearsal dinner was at the Biltmore Ballroom on West Peachtree, one of those grand old Atlanta spaces, high ceilings, crystal sconces, the particular quiet of rooms where old money has soaked into the walls for decades. Kiara arranged the seating herself. My place card was at a round table near the back of the room, right beside the hallway that led to the restrooms. 6 seats. 2 of Lamar's business associates who spoke to each other all evening and not once to me. An elderly couple I'd never met who smiled politely and then fell into their own quiet conversation. And an empty chair beside me that stayed empty all evening, as though even the furniture had been briefed on my position in this family. From that seat, I had a clear view of the head table. I watched Desmond. Dark suit, shoulders square, jaw still, his eyes making careful, measured rounds of that room all night. I noticed things I don't think anyone else noticed. The way he held his water glass but rarely drank from it. The way he laughed at exactly the right moments, but the laugh never quite reached his eyes. The way his right hand, every now and then, moved briefly to the breast pocket of his jacket. Just a touch, just a confirmation, and then stilled again. He was keeping something close, and he was very, very calm. I watched Kiara, radiant and performing, her laughter pitched perfectly for every passing guest. I watched Lamar raise a toast about family unity and beautiful new beginnings with the ease of a man who has practiced sincerity until it fits like a second skin. People applauded warmly. Then Kiara turned, just slightly, just enough, and said to the table nearest her, loud enough to carry, "I told the wedding coordinator to seat the help somewhere comfortable. Some people are just not quite ballroom people, you understand." More laughter. Knowing. Appreciative. I felt it land in my chest like a stone dropped from a height. I set my water glass down carefully, folded both hands in my lap, looked at the white tablecloth and breathed. 3 slow counts in, 3 slow counts out, the way my grandmother taught me when the world tries to provoke you before you're ready. I was 62 years old. I had endured harder things than this, but something was wearing down inside me that evening. Some quiet reserve I'd been drawing from since the lobby, and I didn't know how much was left. I thought about getting up, walking out through those heavy front doors, past the valets in their red jackets, back to the bus stop on Peachtree. I thought about how good the night air would feel against my face, how clean. I stayed because of Desmond, because of a USB drive no bigger than my thumbnail, because of a man who had squeezed my hand hard enough to leave a memory in my bones and said, "Just trust me." 20 minutes later, a hand at my elbow, Desmond, leaning down as though helping with my wrap, his mouth barely moving. "Come with me, just a few minutes. Tell anyone who asks you needed air. We slipped out through a side door into the parking structure on Forsyth Street, away from the music and the chandeliers, just us, the low hum of the city, the smell of rain moving in from somewhere west. I could still hear the faint strains of the dinner music through the wall, something elegant and forgettable, and it made the parking structure feel like a different world entirely. He opened the passenger door of his car, sat beside me, reached into his jacket, put a phone in my hand, and pressed play. At first, the voices didn't register. Then they did. Kiara's voice, Lamar's voice. Easy, unhurried. The way people talk when they're sure no one important is listening. She'll sign before she understands what she signed. The notary is ours. Don't worry about it. Once it transfers, we list it within 60 days. With the pecan harvest revenue projections, we're looking at 4.2 on the low end. $4.2 million. My farm, Gerald's land. $4.2 million. And they meant to take it with a forged signature, a bought notary, and 30 days of borrowed warmth. I sat in that passenger seat and felt something move through me. Not rage. I've never been a rage woman. Something quieter, colder. The particular grief of realizing you were targeted because you're the kind of woman who trusts. I noticed distantly that my hands were very still in my lap, perfectly still, the way they go when I am absorbing something the rest of me isn't ready to deal with yet. Gerald used to call it my counting before the storm face. He said I went quiet like that, and he always knew to wait, because when I came back out of it, I would know exactly what I thought. I came back out of it and looked at my son. "How long have you known?" I asked. 8 months. His voice was steady. I found the first discrepancy in a financial record Lamar showed me, a land parcel in Macon that didn't match the public deed. I started digging. And the engagement? The wedding? He was quiet for a moment. I needed to stay close enough to gather everything. If I ended it too early, they walk clean and do this to someone else. The USB you saw tonight goes to the ADA's office tomorrow morning. Everything is on it. I stared at my son. "Desmond." My voice came out lower than I expected. "You let me sit at that table by the restrooms." He didn't look away. "Yes. You let her call me the gardener in that lobby tonight in front of everyone." "Yes." "You watched it happen." "Mom." He covered my hand with both of his, those big, warm hands, so much like his father's. "Every word Kiara said to you tonight is on camera, every dismissal, every laugh. When this comes out tomorrow, they won't be able to claim they were respectful to you. The record will show exactly who they are, and exactly who you are." Then he said the thing I've turned over every day since. "I made you endure tonight so that tomorrow they won't dare look you in the face." I sat with that in the quiet of that parking structure, mist settling on the windshield. The music from the ballroom was gone now, or maybe I'd stopped hearing it. "Is that everything?" I asked. "Is that all you have?" He hesitated, just a fraction. "There's more. Forensic handwriting analysis on the signature. The notary's connection to a prior price transaction in Savannah. I'll show you everything after tomorrow." After tomorrow. He was still holding something back. I sat with that too. Then I looked at my son, his square jaw, his steady eyes, his father's face, and I made my decision. "Take me back inside," I said. "I have a dinner to finish." He blinked. "Mom." "I have sat at harder tables than that one, Desmond Ellis." I straightened my dress. "Take me back inside." He laughed, short, real, surprised out of him. For just one moment, he looked exactly like the boy who used to chase fireflies in the back field and bring them to me in a mason jar. I reached up and touched his cheek once. Then I walked back through that side door, down that hallway, and sat down at my table by the restrooms. Drank my water, smiled pleasantly at the elderly couple across from me, and waited. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is simply stay in the room. Think about what Desmond actually did that night. He didn't protect his mother from pain in the moment. He let her feel it, fully, publicly, on record, because he understood something most people miss. Real protection isn't always about preventing the wound. Sometimes it's about making sure the wound can't be denied or rewritten later. That's a particular kind of love, cold-eyed and strategic on the outside, completely devoted on the inside. And Raven, sitting in a parking structure in the rain, staring at evidence of a scheme against everything she'd built, chose to trust it. Not because she was certain, because she knew her son. That kind of trust doesn't come from logic. It comes from 30 years of shared living. But nothing I'd endured or imagined could have prepared me for what my son did the following afternoon in front of every single person in that wedding pavilion. The wedding was set for 4 o'clock at Piedmont Park, the outdoor pavilion near the meadow. A Saturday in late April, and Atlanta had decided to cooperate. Blue sky, soft breeze through the dogwoods, their last white blooms trembling like they knew something was about to happen beneath them. 240 guests, white chairs in perfect rows, an arch of white roses and eucalyptus, a string quartet near the fountain. Everything exactly as it was meant to look. I was in the second row. Desmond had specifically requested it. I thought it was for appearances. I know now it was so I'd have a clear, unobstructed view of everything that followed. I had not slept the night before, not a single hour. I'd lain in my hotel room, a room Desmond had booked for me, quiet and clean, with a window that looked out over the city, and watched the sky go from black to gray to the particular pale gold of an Atlanta spring morning. I got up at 5, made the small pot of hotel coffee, sat in the chair by the window and talked to Gerald the way I talk to him sometimes, when things are beyond my ability to carry alone. Whatever happens today, I said to the window, to the city, to wherever he is, help me stand up straight. I believe he heard me. Kiara came down the aisle on her father's arm. I'll say this honestly, she was breathtaking. Cathedral-length ivory gown moving like still water. The crowd did what crowds do. Hands pressed to chests, soft sounds of admiration. Someone behind me whispered, "She is absolutely stunning." Zora Price sat across the aisle. She found my eyes and held them for exactly 1 second. The look of a woman who is completely certain she has already won. I held her gaze for that 1 second. And then I looked away first. Not because I was defeated, but because I was done performing for her. I had nothing left to prove to Zora Price. What was coming would do that work for me. The officiant began. The familiar words settled over the pavilion. When it came time for Desmond's vows, he reached into his jacket. I thought he was reaching for a written card. Instead, he pulled out a small remote. He looked at Kiara, directly, steadily. No anger on his face, only that absolute stillness I've known since he was a boy, and said, clearly and calmly, "I'm sorry. I cannot do this." The officiant blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "I cannot marry someone who planned to commit fraud against my mother." The silence that dropped over that pavilion. 240 people. The only sounds were the fountain, the birds, the soft April wind through the eucalyptus. Kiara's face moved through 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, fear. Then something rigid and controlled. The face she put on when she was managing a situation. "Desmond," she said carefully, "honey, let's step away and talk about this privately." He pressed the remote. The screen behind the arch, the one that had been running their engagement photos in soft golden light, went white, then black, then a waveform. Then audio poured through the pavilion speakers, clean and unmistakable. Lamar's voice. "The old woman's almost ready to sign. Once the wedding's done, that land is ours. It'll cover everything we owe." Someone in the third row gasped out loud. Then Kiara's voice. "She'll sign before she understands what she signed. The notary is ours. Don't worry." Then the forged deed appeared on screen, page by page, enlarged so every guest could read it clearly. My name, my farm, a signature that wasn't mine, followed by that handwritten timeline. Week 1, observation. Week 2, rapport building. Wedding day, transfer executed. Week 3, auction listing. The string quartet had set their instruments down. Lamar was on his feet, face the color of old concrete. You cannot. That recording was obtained illegally. Obtained legally, Desmond said, with the full cooperation of the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. They have been building this case for 6 months. A woman stood from several rows behind me, perhaps 70, small, impeccably dressed, gray hair. When she spoke, her voice was controlled. They did the same thing to my sister, in Savannah. 200 acres. She lost everything. She never recovered. The murmur that moved through those guests was low and dark, like weather coming in. And then Lamar turned to his own daughter. In front of God and every witness in that pavilion, and a camera he hadn't noticed mounted beneath the pavilion eave, he said, "This was your idea. You brought me into this. You found the land record. You came to me with the plan. Do not let them put this on me." "Don't you dare," Kiara said, voice cracking for the first time. "Do not stand there and say that in front of—" "You initiated contact with the family. You identified the target." They were dismantling each other in real time, in front of their own guests, under the dogwood trees, under that blue April sky. I watched it happen with a strange, clear stillness inside me. The way you feel sometimes in the middle of a storm when you realize the worst has passed, and what remains is just noise. Then the side gate opened. A man in a dark suit walked in, unhurried. He introduced himself to the officiant with a brief nod, then addressed the pavilion. "I apologize for the disruption. My name is Alton Burke. I'm an assistant district attorney for Fulton County. Lamar Price and Zora Price are asked to come with us. This investigation involves multiple counts of deed fraud, document forgery, and elder financial exploitation in Fulton, Chatham, and Bibb counties." Zora made a sound I won't try to describe. Kiara sank. Not dramatically, not the way people fall in movies. She simply went down onto the pavilion floor in her cathedral-length gown, like the effort of holding everything together finally cost more than she had left. She looked up at Desmond from that floor, and her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I did love you," she said. "At some point, somewhere in it, I did." Desmond looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe," he said, "but you loved 25 acres of my mother's land a great deal more, and my mother earned every inch of that land before you ever knew her name." He turned and looked at me, sitting in that second row in my cotton dress and Simone's pearl earrings, hands folded in my lap. 240 people turned with him. I didn't cry. I was finished crying. I stood up the way women our age stand, slowly, deliberately, completely in possession of ourselves, and I held my son's gaze across that beautiful, silent pavilion and nodded once, just once. He nodded back. The woman from Savannah walked toward me, took both of my hands in hers, apologized quietly for laughing in that lobby 2 days before. She hadn't known then. She knew now. Others nearby lowered their heads. The whole pavilion felt like it was exhaling something it had been holding without realizing it. I looked at her. This small, dignified woman who had driven here today, carrying a grief that was not hers to carry alone. And I thought about her sister in Savannah, about the widow in Macon, about all the women who had stood exactly where I was standing and had nobody standing with them. I squeezed her hands and said, "It's over now." The pavilion was completely still. Now let me tell you what was truly happening beneath the surface, because the shock of that moment can make you miss the layers underneath. Lamar's first instinct when the walls closed in was to turn on his own daughter immediately and publicly. That wasn't panic, that was pattern. A man who has spent years exploiting others has also spent years calculating who to sacrifice to preserve himself. Kiara in that moment was simply the next available resource, And Kiara, who had built her entire plan around controlling every variable, found herself blindsided by the one thing she never accounted for: a son who loved his mother more than he feared exposure. What Desmond did in that pavilion, he didn't explode, didn't humiliate for sport. He presented evidence, named a crime, and stepped back. The destruction that followed came entirely from the Price family's own unraveling, the panic, the blame shifting, the desperate self-preservation of people who have never been truly accountable. Desmond simply built the room. They tore it down themselves. And Kiara's final words, "I did love you," may or may not have been true, but by that point, it no longer mattered. Because love that coexists with a forged signature and a 60-day auction timeline isn't the kind of love that deserves an answer. I stood there in that April light, in the middle of all of it, and felt my spine straighten with something I hadn't felt in longer than I could name. They thought the wedding was the ending. It was only the beginning of everything that came right. The days that followed were busy, the way justice is busy. Not loud, not dramatic, just thorough, unhurried, complete. The Fulton County investigation moved quickly once ADA Burke's office had Desmond's full evidence package. 8 months of work. Audio recordings, the forged deed with forensic handwriting analysis confirming the signature wasn't mine. Financial records tying the Price family to 2 prior land fraud cases, and the notary's full cooperation once he was looking at federal charges of his own. The case in Savannah, the widow in Macon, 2 more families came forward in the weeks after the wedding, people who saw a news segment and recognized their own story in it. Lamar and Zora Price were charged with multiple counts of deed fraud and elder financial exploitation. Kiara faced separate charges of conspiracy and forgery. Their attorneys were expensive. Their arguments were creative. But evidence doesn't have feelings, doesn't change its story under pressure. The settlement offer came about 3 weeks after the charges were filed, a significant amount, confidentiality in exchange for reduced cooperation. We turned it down. Desmond asked me twice if I was sure. I was sure both times. A settlement would have kept things quiet, kept other families from knowing the truth about what had been done to them and by whom. I thought about the woman from Savannah standing in that pavilion, composed and small and dignified. I thought about the widow in Macon who lost everything. I thought about all the families who didn't know yet that what happened to them had a name and a pattern and a family behind it. We chose public justice for all of them. Turning down that settlement was one of the clearest decisions I've ever made. Not because it was easy, because sometimes the right thing isn't about what you get. It's about what you refuse to let stay hidden. Silence, even well-compensated silence, has a cost. And the people who'd already paid it deserved better than our quiet cooperation with the people who took from them. Then Desmond told me something I hadn't known. 18 months before Kiara ever set foot on Sweet Auburn, before any of this began, he had quietly contacted the Georgia Department of Agriculture and initiated the process to have the farm designated as an agricultural heritage property under Georgia's Heritage Corridor program. The designation was approved the previous February. "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "It means," he said, setting his coffee mug down on my kitchen table with a small, satisfied sound, "that even if everything else had failed, even if the forged contract had somehow held, Sweet Auburn Farm could not have been transferred to a private developer without a years-long state review process." I built a floor under the floor, Mom. I sat very still. "When did you start that?" "When Dad died," he said simply. "I always knew this land needed protecting. I just didn't know what from yet." I looked at this man, 34 years old, sitting in the same kitchen chair he sat in as a boy, drinking the same coffee I've been making him his whole life. And I thought about Gerald in his work gloves. 47 pecan trees planted on pure faith. Every morning, I'd walk to that farm alone after he passed, talking to the soil and the trees and the open sky, telling it I wasn't giving up. I had been holding the land for Desmond. He had been holding a land for me. We just hadn't told each other. Desmond moved back to Sweet Auburn that spring, commutes to his engineering firm in Atlanta 3 days a week, The rest of the time he's here, fixing what needs fixing, learning the farm's rhythms the way you can only learn them by being present through all 4 seasons. He met Tanya 8 months after the wedding that wasn't. A mutual friend from church introduced them. She works in landscape restoration, came to Sweet Auburn on a Saturday morning in work boots, and spent her first hour asking me detailed questions about the pecan trees, taking notes in a small spiral notebook. I liked her before she finished her first cup of coffee. That's the fastest I've liked anyone in years. Tanya is direct, warm, laughs easily, doesn't perform anything for anyone. What you see is what she actually is, her own calluses, her own work history, her own clear-eyed sense of what matters. And the way she looks at Desmond, she looks at the man, not the credentials, not the property, the man. After everything Desmond had witnessed, the performed affection, the staged warmth, the kindness deployed like a weapon, Tanya must have felt like a door opening onto clean air. There's something quietly healing about a person who doesn't need you to be anything other than what you are. He'd spent nearly 2 years watching someone perform love. Now he was learning what it felt like when nobody was performing anything at all. They married in October, right here at Sweet Auburn Farm. 20 folding chairs in 2 rows beneath the pecan trees. Simone and Ray, Gerald's sister Claudette from Cincinnati, who arrived with a Tupperware of tea cakes she set on the folding table before she'd even taken off her coat. A few friends from church on Auburn Avenue, Desmond's colleague Marcus and his wife. Tanya's mother Doris, who brought a sweet potato pie I am still thinking about regularly. Pastor Elaine performed the ceremony. Plain gold bands, no fuss, no performance. Just 2 people making a genuine promise under trees older than their marriage would need to be real. After the ceremony, Desmond and Tanya danced in the grass while Simone played music from a Bluetooth speaker balanced on the old fence post by the gate. The one Gerald repaired so many times it's essentially a different fence post now, but we've always called it the same one. I stood at the edge of the pecan grove and watched them. I thought, Gerald, you would have loved every single thing about this day. Then Desmond looked up from across the grass and stretched out his hand. Mom, come on! I laughed, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and real, completely uncalculated, and I went out into that grass in my good Sunday shoes and we danced. All 3 of us. Under the pecan trees Gerald planted 30 years ago on pure faith. That night, after everyone had gone and the folding chairs were stacked in the barn and the last of Doris's sweet potato pie was wrapped in foil on the counter, I sat on the back porch in Gerald's old chair and listened to the farm settle into its nighttime sounds. The creak of wood, the rustle of the pecan canopy, the distant highway hum on the breeze. For the first time in longer than I could name, I felt completely at peace. But there was still one more thing I needed to find. And I found it on a quiet Tuesday morning in November, in a cedar chest at the foot of my son's old bed. It was a Tuesday morning in November when I finally sorted through Desmond's childhood room. Not because it needed it, I'd kept it clean for years. Changed sheets when he visited, dusted the bookshelf with its trophies and worn paperbacks, left everything exactly where it was, the way mothers do. Because some rooms are less storage and more prayer. But that morning I felt ready to let it become something living again. A guest room for Doris. A room that served the present instead of preserving the past. I made my coffee first, stood at the kitchen window and drank it slowly, looking out at the pecan trees in their November colors. That deep golden brown that means the harvest is done and the trees are going quiet for the season. There's a particular stillness to the farm in November that I have always loved. Not emptiness, rest. The difference between the two is something you can feel in your chest if you spent enough years paying attention. I was working through the cedar chest at the foot of his bed when I found the envelope. Old, slightly yellowed, sealed, and on the front, in Desmond's 15-year-old handwriting, careful, slightly uneven, trying hard to look grown. For Dad, to be read whenever. Gerald never read it, gone before he could. Or maybe Desmond wrote it after and could never find the moment to give it. I held it in my lap for a long time without opening it. Then I opened it. I won't share everything inside. Some things belong to a family and not to the world. But this much I'll tell you. At 18 years old, my son had made a promise to his father. A promise to protect the farm, to protect me. That whatever he built in the world, he would never forget what ground it was built on. And toward the end, in that young, careful hand, I know how hard Mama works. I see it every single day, and I want her to know that she will never have to fight alone, not as long as I am here. I sat on the edge of that bed and I cried. Not the sharp, constricted grief I'd been swallowing since the lobby of the Intercontinental. Not the dignity-holding tears of a woman determined not to break in the wrong place. This was different. The kind of crying that empties you out so it can fill you back up. The kind that's really just love that's run out of room to stay inside. I cried for Gerald, who raised a son like this and didn't live to see who he became. I cried for myself, for the woman who planted 47 pecan trees and watered them alone and carried an entire farm on her shoulders and never once asked to be celebrated, just to be seen. And then I cried with pure gratitude, because I had been seen, all along, by the person who mattered most. I had been completely seen. That letter taught me something about the quiet architecture of love inside a family. We think love has to announce itself, stated, demonstrated, witnessed to count. But Desmond's promise was made at 18, in private, in a letter never delivered, to a father who never read it. And he kept it anyway, for 16 years, without anyone asking, without anyone knowing. That's not the love of performance. That's the love of character, the kind that holds even when no one is watching. Later that afternoon, Tanya came by with lunch, leftover soup and cornbread wrapped in a dish towel. The particular love language of a woman who shows up with food because words sometimes aren't enough. She sat across from me at the kitchen table while I ate, and I told her about the letter. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "He told me once, before we were even officially together, that the one thing he would never allow was for someone to make you feel small. He said, 'My mother is the reason I know what strength looks like. I will not let anyone diminish that.'" I turned toward the kitchen window and looked out at the pecan trees, 47 of them, Gerald's and mine. I thought about Kiara in that lobby, the champagne flute, the perfectly calibrated cruelty. I thought about Zora's check and her silk blouse and the way she stepped on my marigolds. I thought about Lamar's voice in the dark. The old woman's almost ready. And I felt something I hadn't anticipated. Not anger, something quieter, more lasting. Pity. A small, genuine, passing pity for people who can stand in the middle of 25 acres of living history. Trees planted by loving hands, soil turned by decades of honest work, air that smells like earth and family and everything that actually lasts, and see only a number, a transaction, a means to an end. The Price family spent 2 years studying my farm and never once understood what it was. That blindness wasn't just moral. It was a poverty of imagination that no amount of money or status could ever fix. I put on my boots, went out to the farm, walked the full perimeter the way I do at the start of every season, touching fence posts, checking irrigation, reading the ground the way you learn to read it after 30 years of paying close attention. Desmond was out by the east fence line fixing a section of wire that had come loose in the last wind. Tanya was beside him, passing tools, the two of them talking easy in the way of people who are genuinely comfortable in each other's company. They didn't see me at first. I stood at the edge of the pecan grove and watched them, two people who chose each other for the right reasons. Two people who will tend this land long after I no longer can. I picked up my hoe from where it leaned against the fence and went to work. The November sun was low and warm, that particular golden hour light that makes the whole world look like it's worth saving. The soil turned easily, the way it always does when it's been loved long enough to trust the hands working it. And somewhere above me, in the canopy of Gerald's pecan trees, the leaves moved in a wind I couldn't feel from where I stood. Like the trees themselves were nodding. Yes, This is exactly how it should be. This story reminds us that dignity isn't something anyone can give you or take from you. It's something you carry in your own bones, in your own choices, in the quiet decision to stay in the room when everything in you wants to leave. Raven Thornton was never the gardener. She was the ground itself, the deep, patient, sustaining earth that holds everything up without ever asking to be thanked. The people who tried to diminish her saw calloused hands and a cotton dress and a bus ticket. They couldn't see, people like that never can, that those hands had built something they could never buy. When a son honors his mother not with words, but with 8 months of careful work on her behalf, and when a mother chooses to trust her child through humiliation and fear, something unbreakable forms between them. Something no forged signature, no bought notary, no polished cruelty can touch. Never make yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. The land you work with love will outlast every scheme laid against it, and the people who are truly yours will always know the way home.